Hello and most welcome to 1826, and I will continue 1825 as I started earlier. Francis Lynn, Wittgenstein on thinking as a process or an activity. Is thinking an auxiliary activity? And in 1825, I should just mention, I went through the idea that thinking could be an isolated phenomenon, and now we look into see whether it could be an auxiliary activity. Isolated would mean that it could be separable from other activities of our doings as human beings. A number of commentators, I continue on page 21, have discussed Wittgenstein's remarks concerning thinking and auxiliary activities. But the discussions suffer from deficiencies. Let us first look at some of these remarks made by Wittgenstein. And this too could be said. Someone who thinks as he works will intersperse his work with auxiliary activities. The word thinking does not now mean these auxiliary activities, just as thinking is not talking either. Although the concept thinking is formed on the model of a kind of imaginary auxiliary activity. Just as we might say that the concept of differential quotient is formed on the model of a kind of ideal quotient. These auxiliary activities are not the thinking, but one imagines thinking as the stream which must be flowing under the surface of these expedients. If they are not, after all, to be mere mechanical procedures. Thinking is the imaginary auxiliary activity, the invisible stream, which carries and connects all of these kinds of actions. The grammar of thinking, however, is assimilated to that of speaking. According to Scheer, what these remarks say is this: thinking is not an auxiliary activity. It is only an imaginary one. Which does not really exist. Furthermore, in his view, why Wittgenstein says that thinking is not an auxiliary activity is that he believes that thinking is never an activity. There are two problems with Scheer's account. First, as we discussed at the beginning of section 3, Wittgenstein does not say explicitly that thinking is never an activity. So Scheer has not really explained why thinking is not an auxiliary activity. Second, Scheer does not explain what these above remarks by Wittgenstein really means. Hanfling agrees with Scheer's interpretation that imaginary means false. That is, that thinking is not really an auxiliary activity. But he does not explain why this is so either. Neither does he provide an explanation of the above remarks by Wittgenstein. Hacker cites these remarks by Wittgenstein, but does not explain them either. In order to explicate Wittgenstein's thoughts on the issue, whether thinking is an auxiliary activity, I suggest that we look at the following passage first. Let us imagine someone doing work that involves comparison, trial, choice. Say he is constructing an appliance out of various bits of stuffs with a given set of tools. Every now and then there is the problem: should I use this bit? The bit is rejected, another is tried. Bits are tentatively put together, then dismantled. He looks for one that fits, etc., etc. I now imagine that this whole procedure is filmed. The worker perhaps also produces sound effects like or ha. As it were, sounds of hesitation, sudden finding, decision, satisfaction, dissatisfaction. But he does not utter a single word. Those sound effects may be included in the film. I have the film shown me, and I now invent a soliloquy for the worker. Things that fits his manner of work, its rhythm, his play of expression, his gestures and spontaneous noises, they correspond to all this. So I sometimes make him say, no, that bit is too long, perhaps another will fit better. Or what am I to do now? Got it? Or that is not bad, etc. If the worker can talk, would it be a falsification of what actually goes on if he were to describe that precisely and were to say, e.g., for instance, then I thought, no, that won't do. I must try it another way. And so on, although he had neither spoken during the work nor imagined these words. I want to say, may he not later give his wordless thoughts in words. And in such a fashion that we who might see the work in progress could accept this account. And all the more if we had often watched the man working, not just once. This passage is long, but it is very important and is worth analyzing in some detail. In the first paragraph, Wittgenstein explains what auxiliary activities are. The person's task is to construct an appliance. His main activity is to put the right bits of stuff together in the right way to form the appliance. But apart from this, he does many minor activities, such as selecting, trying and rejecting bits of stuff, emitting sounds which may mean hesitation, sudden finding, decision, satisfaction or dissatisfaction. These are called auxiliary activities in Settle 106. The worker does all of this without saying a single word. In the second part of the paragraph, Wittgenstein describes a slightly different example in which the worker speaks a soliloquy, to be discussed later. In the second paragraph, Wittgenstein asks whether we could attribute to the worker the thoughts, "No, that won't do. I must try it another way." The worker could actually use these words later to explain what he was thinking. In particular, he queries whether such description of thoughts could be wrong, whether it could be true that the worker did not have these thoughts. The third one is perplexing. Here, Wittgenstein does not give a straightforward answer to the question just posed. We, the readers, would have thought that the worker did have those thoughts described by those sentences. Since he could later say them himself. But this is not Wittgenstein's answer. Rather, he asks two questions. The first is it possible that we could accept the worker's account? That is, could we say that his words correctly describe his thoughts? To put this in still another way, did the worker really have those thoughts described by his words? What Wittgenstein is doing here is asking us to pay attention to the criteria of attributing thinking and thought to the worker. The second question Wittgenstein poses helps us to see this point. Would we have accepted the worker's account if we had watched him only once? If we had watched him working not just once? If the worker performed those auxiliary activities day in and day out, would we still think that he, while working, really had those thoughts described by his words? Well, if we saw the man working for the first time, call him the first timer, and we saw him doing things such as trying, hesitating, rejecting, showing signs of satisfaction, etc., then we might well say that he was thinking, and might well agree that he had those thoughts he later expressed in words. But if the worker did the same assembling job every day, and each time he performed those auxiliary activities, call him the repeater, we might well think that those activities had become mechanical for him, and might consequently think that when he did those things again, he was no longer thinking and no longer had the thoughts he described later in words. The moral of Zettel 100 is then this: usually when one performs certain auxiliary activities while working, one is thinking. But in certain cases, these auxiliary activities may become mechanical. and in those cases the person is no longer thinking while doing the job. This is a grammatical fact to which everyone would assent. So far we have been dealing with the first example described in the first paragraph of Zettel 100. In that example, the worker did not speak a word. But Wittgenstein also presents a slightly different example here, in which the worker, while performing those auxiliary activities, also speaks a soliloquy consisting of certain phrases. For instance, "No, that bit is too long. Perhaps another will fit better." What is the point of this example? Some hints can be found in Zettel 137. Sometimes when I say, "Just then I had the thought," I may report that I had said those very words to myself, out loud or silently, or if not those, then others of which the present ones reproduce the gist. Surely that often happens. But it does also happen that my present words are not a reproduction, for they are only a reproduction if they are so by rules of projection. In this remark, Wittgenstein discusses two examples. One is that the worker, while working, said those words, "No, that won't do. I must try it another way," out loud or silently. This is different from the example in which the worker did not speak a word. But the point is the same. Sometimes when the worker said, "No, that won't do, I must try it another way," while working, he really had that thought. But sometimes uttering the sentence cannot guarantee this, for he might have uttered the sentence mechanically. So whether uttering the sentence amounts to having the thought depends on the context. That is, the first timer versus the repeater. The second example Wittgenstein talks about in Settle 137 is that the worker spoke a soliloquy whose gist is, "No, that won't do. I must try it another way." This is the same as the second example described in the first paragraph of Settle 100. Did the worker really have this thought? Again, it depends. If the worker spoke the soliloquy for the first time while working, then we might well attribute the thought to him. But if he did this day in and out, we might not want to say that he had the thought. So whether the worker's present words really describe or reproduce what the worker was thinking depends on the context. There must be projection rules for saying under what circumstances a thought can be attributed to the worker, or equivalently, his present words are a genuine reproduction of what the worker was thinking. I do not think it's hard to see here slowly an enormous problem is erupting with the idea that thinking is an auxiliary process. it doesn't fit with what is happening. It neither seems it makes sense to say that there is an accompaniment, a true accompaniment, because the case can be that the worker either has happened to have the same thought that he mentions when he speaks to himself, or he does it mechanically. He has repeated it an endless amount of times, and therefore it is hardly likely that he actually literally thinks it. It would be hard to fathom the possibility that he thinks after the 20th time exactly what he says. How could that happen? And it's no magic, these analogies and lively pictures that Wittgenstein almost like poetry paints up do have an important point, and that is thinking is not an auxiliary process going on somewhere. We don't even have to say it, that process should be in the head or anything like that. But it does make little use in the context to say, the worker has thinking going on the side. That happens to be exactly the same thing that he is thinking. It would be very hard to make any sense of that at all, I'd say. And it's a pretty strong argument against the prevalent idea that thinking is some sort of parallel process that is constantly going on, and that sort of fuels what we do, our movements and our doings. I'd say that idea almost makes no sense whatsoever. I'd say even to the point it does not work. And just let me round it up by saying, by clearing these obscurities up, or fuzzinesses that abide in thinking, Wittgenstein is clearing out an important territory. He is showing a greater possibility by clarity gives much more possibilities. If we get sort of locked into this idea that thinking is a process, we will start hamstring our own doings and thinkings. They will no longer work as they used to do. It's hard to give any examples, but it's like we will invent a fake parallel process. Very similar to the talk of this repeating worker, the second worker that repeats his soliloquy. We would try to put that into our head at the same time as we are our thinking or whatever we are doing. And that would be a friction. Something bother us, our free, well-deserved thinking, making it obscure, making it unclear, and we lose that very important freedom of doing things according to the language game, following the rules. Breaking the rules, I guess, has a price. And that price is, it simply is not working as smoothly as we were hoping. We confuse thinking, and no longer is it flowing freely. I also come to think of how we import things, ideas from India, China, and it's impossible that their words of thinking, which are multifarious, would correspond to the mistake we do with the word thinking in Western languages. And it's not even the same between different languages at any aim. I remember one Zen prose we had in the paper. We read Zen and Wittgenstein. You must stop your thinking. From how we understand thinking, either as a mistake, it doesn't make any sense at all. Because thinking is not a process you can either stop or start. It is definitely not an activity that accompanies doing. So how could you then stop it? As little as you can stop it, can you start it, as most of us are trying. I need to have a cup of coffee so my thinking can start turning. Well, I say thank you very much. Have a very pleasant morning, evening, or day, wherever you are. Bye-bye for now.